Hello, this is Jeff Weiscarver. I'm president of DDME, and first I want to start out by thanking everyone for attending or listening to this broadcast, as we're very excited about the opportunity that the Wellness Monitors DDME's recently released represents, and we anticipate a very successful launch. Having said that, I'm going to go ahead and get started. If at any point in time you would like to ask a question, you can ask during the broadcast, or if you're listening after the fact, just shoot me an email, Jeff at ddmeonline.com, and I'll be glad to get back to you really quick, okay? All right, let's get started. Let's talk about leveraging the top issue in dentistry, treating obstructive sleep apnea with an oral appliance to solve an everyday problem. And they're very linked, and we're going to talk about what that link is and how that represents our opportunity. What if the hottest topic in dentistry, which is directly associated with the most common problem in dentistry, and you were the only one that knew about it? And what if you had access to the only dental product which addresses both issues? And this is the case of what we've developed. So we're very excited about this. There's a clinical upside, tremendous upside for the patient, and there's a tremendous upside for the dentist as well. Okay. All right, let's get started by describing the problem. I'm going to spend just a few minutes talking about sleep apnea. Airway issues is the term I like to use rather than sleep apnea. And bruxism, which is a problem that every single dentist deals with, as opposed to sleep apnea, which is a very commonly discussed, but very rarely does a dentist decide to go ahead and start treating patients for sleep apnea. And we'll talk about some of those reasons why that is, why such a hot topic has a fairly low yield, and why we believe the product we've developed will in part resolve that discrepancy. Okay, so first let's talk about sleep apnea. Sleep apnea is a reduction or cessation of breathing while you're asleep. Snoring is the resistance and subsequent vibration of the soft tissue, in particular when you inhale. Okay, snoring is much more known because it's perceived. It's a nuisance, in addition to being having health consequences. Believe it or not, snoring is not entirely a joke or funny. It's more than a nuisance in many cases. So we're going to talk about how snoring and sleep apnea are related, believe it or not, to bruxism. Sleep apnea occurs in millions of adults and generally goes undiagnosed, primarily because of the fact that sleep apnea and snoring and airway issues occur while the patient's asleep. So there's not a perception that the problem is there. There's a perception of the medical comorbidities associated with sleep apnea and airway issues, but not directly related to the primary problem, which is the breathing problem while asleep. The OSA, sleep apnea, does require a physician to diagnose. It is a medical condition, so dentists need to get a physician involved in order to treat sleep apnea. Okay, and there's a number of health consequences associated with sleep apnea, such as high blood pressure, heart disease, strokes, obesity, and it's a very significant list. And if you noticed, those list of comorbidities are all on the increase, especially in the United States. So the problem isn't going away anytime soon. Okay, so that's OSA as a high level, just a broad brush strokes on what sleep apnea is and airway issues are. Let's talk about treating the problem. Okay, and with the perspective from the medical or the dental. So the most common treatment for a patient diagnosed with sleep apnea is called CPAP, which stands for continuous positive airway pressure. And CPAP is a flow generator. It's about the size of a half a loaf of bread that generates pressure and is delivered through a tube that's attached to a mask on the patient's face or their nose or their nose and mouth. And that positive pressure essentially acts as, some call it a pneumatic splint, or it inflates the airway, and wherever the compromise is in the airway, because there's an increased pressure in that column of air, it doesn't close or restrict. So that's the strategy behind CPAP. CPAP is extraordinarily effective. It does a great job. Essentially what happens is a patient, once they're diagnosed, they get attached to a CPAP machine, and a technician at a sleep lab essentially turns up the CPAP pressure until they're breathing normally. They do have CPAP machines that do this automatically now. They call them AutoPAP or APAPs. But one way or the other, we determine that some amount of pressure beyond the atmospheric pressure is needed to support the airway. That's the good news about CPAP. The unfortunate part of this story is that about half the people, maybe a little better than half, 50 to 60% are compliant. And there's a number of reasons for that. It's not that CPAP is any worse than any other type of treatment. The primary problem is we're dealing with a chronic condition. So CPAP is a treatment, it's not a cure. And anytime you have a chronic condition that requires ongoing treatment, meaning once you stop treatment, you relapse into the condition, the compliance is low in those types of diseases. And so the CPAP might be a little bit higher because of the apparatus, but it's not, the apparatus of CPAP isn't entirely the culprit. It is the fact, part of it at least, that CPAP is a chronic condition, and chronic conditions historically have low compliance levels. Okay. Dentists, on the other hand, take an entirely different strategy for managing an airway. They use what we call an oral appliance therapy, or MRDs, mandibular repositioning devices, MRDs, or oral appliance therapy. There's a number of names for it, but essentially it's two arches, an upper and a lower arch, that have some type of mechanism that will pull or push the lower jaw, the mandible, forward with the idea that we're moving the soft tissue in alignment with the column of air and therefore opening up the airway. So a lot of times the culprit in sleep apnea is the soft tissue kind of in the back of the tongue, and when you fall asleep, the mandible goes back, the soft tissue goes back, and those mechanisms, when combined, compromise the airway. And oral appliance therapy, the strategy is, well, if we prevent the mandible from going back, the soft tissue will be in a better spot. But again, there's two parts to this, and oral appliances generally don't deal with soft tissue. They just move the mandible forward and presumably to open up the airway. Oral appliance therapy is a dental solution to a medical problem. This creates a little bit of headwind for dentists that want to get paid by medical insurance for treatment, in that dentists need to work in concert with physicians. And many times physicians and dentists don't work well together. It's just the fact of life, and this presents a challenge for dentists in some cases. Although oral appliance therapy is preferred, that is, if you were to ask 10 patients when describing CPAP or describing an oral appliance, 9 out of 10 would say, I'll take the oral appliance. The fact is less than 1% of patients with sleep apnea end up on an oral appliance. And when you talk about dollars, and right now we're talking about a $7 or $8 billion a year industry, less than 1% is sad, but it also represents a tremendous opportunity. Okay, so that's the treatment overview for sleep apnea, both from the medical and dental perspective. Okay. Okay, now we're going to talk about the other part of the story, which is bruxism. Bruxism is 100% a dental issue. Physicians don't need to be involved in managing, treating bruxism. Dentists don't need to get the physician's permission to treat bruxism. However, we do know that they're linked, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. But let's just focus on bruxism and what it is. Bruxism is the clenching and grinding of teeth. Sometimes that's clenching and grinding is done with sufficient force that you can actually hear it. It's not kind of like an ongoing nuisance like snoring can be, but in some ways it's a little more annoying because it is periodic, and the noise, it's almost like your fingers on a chalkboard. You know, you just, when you hear it, you just imagine the pressure it's taking to make that noise, and it's like, ooh. Bruxism can occur while you're awake. Typically that's associated with stress and what have you. It's fairly easy to distinguish between the two. Essentially, if your symptoms you're fine when you wake up, and then at the end of the day, your teeth and jaw hurt. Typically, that's us indicating daytime bruxism, which has a completely different approach, as opposed to sleep bruxism, which you wake up with the same symptoms, and then as the day goes on, you feel better. Okay. The damage that occurs mostly occurs while you're asleep, simply because the bruxism that occurs while you're asleep has been proven to be 2, 3, even 4 times stronger than when you're awake. And the most common explanation for that is the pain feedback loop that exists or is in place while you're awake is not in place when you sleep. And the masseter is an extraordinarily strong muscle. And that pain when you experience when you're awake causes you to back off on the masseter muscle because you want to relief from the pain. That is not in place while you're asleep, so the masseter is free to exercise its full potential strength when clenches and grinds occur at night. The primary issue with bruxism is the fact that the teeth get damaged. Okay, so we're damaging teeth. There's also some symptoms associated with jaw pain, clicking. Sometimes your jaw can't open all the way, or it opens too far. And those are kind of symptoms related to temporomandibular joint disorder, TMJD. But most commonly, bruxism is identified by damage to the teeth. Okay, so a dentist will look into your mouth and you say, oh, look at all those cracks. It looks like you brux. Has anybody ever commented on that type of thing? The other part of this is that it causes damage to dental work, such as crowns, bridges, and restorations. So if a dentist has put in a bridge, for example, and you're clenching and grinding, that bridge is under tremendous forces, and probably the same type of forces that caused that bridge to be put there in the first place is now having to bear those same forces, and a lot of times they can't, and bridges fail, or crowns fail, or restorations fail. And this is because dentists tend to deal with specific complaints and not the causes. So if you come in and you say I have jaw pain, they'll do something to relieve you of the pain, but whatever caused the pain, sometimes, a lot of times is not addressed. In this case, tooth damage is being repaired, but the cause of the tooth damage is not being addressed. And that has some implications about what I'll talk about in a little bit. So let's talk about now bruxism treatment. Dentists are taught in college to put a guard in. They call them occlusal guards, bruxism guards, night guards. There's a number of names for them. Their primary goal is to protect the enamel when bruxism is suspected or detected. There's a couple of different types of occlusal guards, night guards. There's uppers, lowers, partials. There's a variety of them that have been accepted over time, and they're used by almost all dentists. And so it's a very common therapy for dentists. Okay, so now let's talk about chasing the damage. So when a dentist suspects or strongly suspects that the patient has bruxism, they'll make them some type of guard, and hopefully that'll work. The other path that occurs is that the patient starts damaging their teeth to the extent that we need to put in crowns. The crowns are oftentimes broken because, again, we're chasing symptoms and not necessarily addressing the issue. So when you put a crown in because the patient clenches and grinds, you don't address the clenching and grinding, the crown is likely going to fail. So then over a period of time, we're just going to pull those teeth and put in a bridge. And the reason the bridge is there is really not addressed, and we're chasing the symptom. The bridge will fail. Then we go into and start looking at restorations, whether it's dentulous work or the most common one now is implants. So imagine doing a big implant job and you haven't addressed the problem yet. So that's another upside that we'll talk about in just a minute. Okay, so there's really no cure. There's marginal treatment. You know, the idea here is that, again, the dentist perspective is we address complaints. So if if a dentist identifies a broken or chipped teeth, they're going to address the complaint or the chipped tooth by trying to protect the enamel. A lot of times the perspective isn't, okay, what caused this tooth to be chipped? And let's tackle that and then deal with the chipped tooth. A lot of times that's not the perspective. So this is why when I talk about the method that we're going to describe in just a minute is a paradigm shift, that it's related to what that exact topic. Okay. All right. So now I've talked about sleep apnea and airway problems, snoring, and I've described bruxism and what the therapies are for bruxism. Next topic, I'm going to discuss OSA and bruxism relationship, the airway and bruxism relationship. And the vast majority of OSA patients, people that have some type of airway issue, have demonstrated or are demonstrating bruxism. One of the curious things about the response of clenching and grinding from an airway problem is that response goes away over time. And this is what's made it so difficult to identify this issue, because people who are years into their sleep apnea disease actually don't clench and grind, but they have damaged teeth. So, when you bring a dentist in, they'll say, well, it looks like at one point maybe you had a bruxing problem, but now you don't. This was very confusing, and we now know that we've collected enough data points in the various continuums of the disease. We know people who are in the early phases of an airway problem, snoring, upper airway resistance, and early sleep apnea, they do tend to clench much more at the end of their respiratory event than somebody that's had sleep apnea for 15 years. People that are years and years into their sleep apnea a lot of times don't clench at all. Okay? A lot of people are surprised to know that almost any type of airway issue can trigger a clench or a grind, so including snoring. We have plenty of examples of people that have crescendo snoring that's getting louder and louder, and then there's a giant clench and the snoring goes away for a little bit. Then they get snore louder, louder, clench, and then they kind of go through this cycle. We see that often. So the third bullet on this is kind of where we're going to pivot. And by that I mean, when a dentist sees damaged teeth, their instincts due to what they've learned in dental school is to put a guard in. And we know that anytime you put a guard in, it's going to refactor the functioning of the airway. Okay? So the implication is, if somebody has a compromised airway and they're snoring, let's say, for example, and I say to you, there's an 80% chance that snoring is going to get worse, or maybe the snoring is going to be exacerbated to full-blown sleep apnea in the presence of the guard. Now we're changing things. This is where we have to pivot and decide, okay, what's the best thing to do for a patient? And right now the line of thinking is, well, let's protect the enamel, but I think we need to rethink that strategy, because the very therapy that's designed to protect the enamel exacerbates the thing that caused the problem in the first place. Okay? So very important point. And I say it here, the very treatment prescribed by thousands of dentists has the potential to make the bruxism problem worse. Okay? Now, we're protecting the enamel, but at what cost? And that cost is sleep apnea or airway condition is a life-threatening disease, and there's an 80% chance that the presence of that guard is going to make that life-threatening disease accelerate. And we're doing this to protect the enamel. Most dentists wouldn't be satisfied with that exchange. Okay? So this is, again, when we start talking to dentists about this is where the paradigm shift comes into play. Okay? So let's talk about guards triggering bruxism to get worse, and what is, if a dentist buys into that, and they should because it's fairly well documented, what's the alternative? Okay, because the dentist isn't going to say, well, I'm not going to ignore the damage, so what do you suggest that I do? So on this page, we're looking at three options. We have the guard, okay? So again, a guard doesn't automatically make the airway worse on everybody. There's a 20-25% chance that that airway might improve, but it's a much higher percentage that the airway is going to get worse, okay? But most of the time, the vast majority of the time, when a dentist puts in a guard, they're going to ignore or not even know what is going on with the airway. Okay, so that's the downside is the guards, they're quick, they're easy, and they protect the enamel. The downside is they likely worsen the airway, which in cases where bruxism is caused by the airway, what's the exchange there? Okay, the next item there, I have BRX Pro. Now I'm going to talk about the BRX Pro at length in a little bit, but the reason that DDME developed the BRX Pro is because of the third item. So I'm going to go to the third item, and then you'll understand the purpose of the BRX Pro. So the BRX Pro, the dentist is going to charge $150 to $250 to the patient. It's $90 to the dentist, and that's a product that's a DDME product. Right now, what most dentists do that are willing to treat sleep apnea, they put in sleep apnea appliances, and the cost is on average about $3,000. So you can see the jump. So, historically we've gone from $100 to $250 appliance or guard to a $3,000 to $4,000 sleep apnea appliance. And that's a huge gap. I mean, that's tough to go from 100 to 3,000. And there was, and a lot of dentists, and again, there's reasons for this. A lot of dentists just aren't willing to treat patients with sleep apnea with an oral appliance. That's why sleep apnea is such a hot topic, but there's a low adoption rate. This is why. Most dentists don't want to do it. So as we kind of expose this paradox of the guard causing the problem to get worse, people would say, geez, that's a good, great information. What do I do about it? We would say at DDME, make them a sleep apnea appliance, and that's a non-starter for the vast majority of dentists. I would be surprised to hear that a half of 1% of all dentists treat sleep apnea. I know it's not 1%. So, we're talking about 99% of the dentists out there don't treat sleep apnea with an oral appliance. So when you say use an oral appliance, we cut off that segment. So, to us, at DDME, that was an unanticipated outcome. So what we did is we came up with the BRX Pro, which has elements of both. And the basic difference between the BRX Pro and the sleep apnea appliance is the BRX Pro prevents the mandible from going back into the airway for the purpose of reducing clenching and grinding, not for treating sleep apnea. The BRX Pro, Bruxism Pro, is designed to help patients with their bruxism, okay? And one of its strategies, there's a few strategies in its design, is to stabilize the airway and reduce those triggers that are causing the clenching and grinding, okay? And our price point is much closer to the occlusal guard than the sleep apnea appliance, okay? All right. At this point, we are going to have an open discussion. I'm going to kind of pause it and skip this for the sake of the recording. If you're listening to the recording and you have a question about the first chapter in our discussion today, send me an email or give me a call and with your question or comment, and we'll go over it with you, okay? Okay, so let's talk about the solution. So I've covered the problem as we see it with the dentists, and so this is what we've come up with to help dentists. Okay, the product is DDME's wellness monitors. We call it the GEMPro. We'll show it in just a second. Its design guidance was it needed to be low cost and simple to use. It solves a major problem, which I've described. It generates revenue for the dentist and saves time and money. Okay, anybody that sells into the dental space will appreciate those 5 bullets. Okay, and we took those 5 bullets into every part of the design of the GEMPro. Okay, so what is the GEMPro? The GEMPro is a monitor. It's designed to identify, quantify the issue for the dentist so they can prescribe a treatment plan that's appropriate for the patient and not just blindly pick one and hope it works. Okay, so the GEMPro, there's 2 sensors. The first sensor is our amplifier. It does record snoring. It records body position, sleep apnea, and airway issues are highly positional. So we need to know what position the patient's sleeping in because moving the position can be a therapeutic option and a very powerful one, I might add. We monitor bruxism. We count clenches, we count grinds, we assess the strength of the clenching and grinding, and we provide the report, and we can also tell when these clenches and grinds are lined up with the oxygen desaturations. We record heart rate. When there's a lot of heart rate variability throughout the night, we know that that's highly indicative of some type of airway issue. And then obviously on the oximeter, we're going to also record SEO2, which is the number of oxygen desaturations. We call it ODI, Oxygen Desaturation Index. So the oximeter does 4 and 5, heart rate and SpO2, and the DDME amplifier does the first 3, snoring, body position, and bruxism. Okay, so that's the sensors, and let's talk about the overall product. The overall product is those sensors that I just talked about, and they're both Bluetooth enabled and transmit their data wirelessly to a tablet that's in a case. So this whole kit goes home with the patient in a case. They open up the case, they remove the 2 sensors, wear them. So you put a wrist oximeter on like a watch, and you clip the amplifier to the lapel of your shirt or pajamas, and then you go to bed. Okay, it transmits wirelessly those signals to the tablet. The tablet in the morning does a calculation, generates a preliminary report, and then has the ability to send the report to the dentist using Wi-Fi in the patient's home to the dentist. So in the morning, the patient can click next and finished and send, and that data, if they've connected the tablet to Wi-Fi, gets sent to the dentist without the patient even having to bring the device back. And there's some very key situations where that's a feature that only we have and is very beneficial for the dentist. Okay, we'll talk about that in just a bit. But know that 2 sensors are Bluetooth, wireless to the tablet. Tablet collects and analyzes, creates a report, sends the report and the raw data to the dentist. Okay. Here's a copy of the preliminary report from the tablet, and there's a set of graphs. We do calculate some numbers. This is a preliminary report. Now it provides some good information, and like for example, the colors on the graphs are based on body position. We love that, and dentists love it. It's critical. So imagine you're a dentist and they have an airway issue and bruxism as a result of the airway issue, but they're perfectly fine sleeping on their side. Okay, so if you're a dentist, all you need to do is get that patient off their back. There's plenty of ways to do that. There's pillows, there's a bed partner, what have you. I mean, imagine being able to cure snoring with a positional pillow. With this device, you'll be able to make that recommendation because you know that snoring would be positional. If somebody just says snoring, I snore, and you give them a positional pillow, you would never know if they were positional or not. With our monitor, spend 50 cents, find out, and if that's all you need to do, that's great. The patient's going to appreciate it, the patient's bed partner is going to appreciate it, and you've done well for your patient, and you made a couple of bucks in the meantime. Okay, so that's a preliminary report. Again, in the morning, assuming the patient's connected the tablet to their Wi-Fi, we also transmit the raw data. So the dentist gets a preliminary report with the raw data, and there's a desktop application that's included in the system, and that desktop application can do a much more complex analysis of the data that's been sent to them. And this is a sample of that report. Okay, For the sake of time, I'm not going to take a deep dive into everything on this report. For example, oxygen desaturation index, that's the number of oxygen desaturations per hour. A desaturation is 3%. So there's a long list of items here that we calculate. The other thing that I'll tell you about this report is we do a very clever thing, and I'm very proud of what we've developed, and that is we do a calibration right before the patient goes to bed, and that's the calibration instructions are provided in the tablet. So the tablet will tell you exactly what to do, and you swipe, exactly what to do, swipe, and one of those steps is a calibration. And what we do is you have the patient bite down and then relax. Bite down as hard as you can, relax, and we do that 5 times, and then we calculate the maximum waking clench force, and then we also we average the clenches, and then we do there's an algorithm on that, and then we calculate what we call an EU, an energy unit, and we use that energy unit to predict the energy exerted by the masseter throughout the night. So we have a very clever way to say, okay, this patient clenches a lot, but the clenches aren't very strong, or conversely, they don't clench, but when they do, it's very strong. And then everybody, patients are somewhere between those two on a continuum on those outcomes. Okay, so this is the report. Again, it's very beneficial, and the thing that I keep coming back to is you get this for 50 cents. I mean, honestly, it's that's all it costs to get this data to the dentist. At this point, again, for the people that are attending the webinar, we're going to have a kind of a question and answer. I'm going to pause and then bring it back up. If you are listening to this webinar, again, just send me an email or give me a call if you have any questions about the product, okay? Because the next topic, chapter 3 for our discussion today is sales tools. So that's what we're going to talk about next. Sales tools. Number 1, cold calling with a script. So if you are going to be calling dentists that you know or have a list of dentists that you have relationships with, and you want to share this opportunity with them, you're going to need to be able to have a conversation about the product, the problem, and what opportunity this new product offers the dentist. And that's what I mean by script. So when you're going to make that call, if there's any doubt in your mind how that conversation is going to go, give me a call and we'll practice. I'll pretend to be a dentist. You pitch me, and we'll work it up for you. And that way you'll be very, very comfortable. One thing I didn't mention that I'll mention now is I'm talking at a fairly high level and not taking a deep dive into any particular topic for this conversation today, simply because this is an introductory conversation. If you would like to know more about any or all of these topics so you feel comfortable having a conversation with a dentist, give me a call. And we'll go over in greater detail. I am going to schedule kind of a second call, and on that second call, the prerequisite is you've listened or attended the first one, because on the second call, I am going to take a deeper dive into all the topics. We'll go more clinically into sleep apnea and bruxism. We'll talk about research. I'll present some papers. I'm going to get a little bit more technical about the description of the product and how it's worked and how the training goes for the dentist. So on that call, I just want you to know that my intention is to get you more educated, because I do know, having worked with sales teams in the past, all sales reps, no one wants to go into a gunfight with a knife. And, if you're not comfortable talking about the subject or the product that you're selling, that's kind of what you're doing. So I want to make sure that if you're not comfortable talking about any one of these topics, just give me a call and we'll get you to where you need to be. Okay? So that's one, cold calling. Number 2, emails. I will say, I'll introduce Shannon Ross. She's the operations manager for DDME. She does all of the training, all of the support, and just does a phenomenal job. Customers love her. And she sent out 100 emails on Friday, and we sold 4 systems by today. So anybody that's sold by emails knows that's an extraordinary response. So emails will work. I'll show you an example of a email that Shannon sent out, and we can develop an. If you have a group of people that you want to send an email out, I'll help you develop the content of that email, and then you develop your leads. We'd be very happy to do that for you. Study clubs is another great sales tool. So if you've been selling into dentistry for a while, you're familiar with study clubs. And what we've done on a preliminary basis is if you have a dentist that is enthusiastic about what we're doing, maybe they bought 2 GEMPros, they start using it, they said, geez, this is great, I'm going to talk about it in my next study club. We'll design an incentive for that individual. So give me a call in that scenario, or give Barry a call, and he'll be familiar with an additional incentive that we can offer that dentist that brings 12 of his buddies to a study club, talks about the GEMPro, invites you, and you sell 4 monitors. I mean, that dentist should be rewarded for that effort, and we're willing to do that. Number 4 is demo from a 2-page brochure. So if you're going to walk into a dental office and you're lucky enough to get 3 minutes of the dentist's time or the front office person's time, there's a 2-page brochure that we believe you'll be able to demo the product from. We haven't had to have the actual product in front of somebody to buy it. So in fact, the ones that we've sold, they didn't know what it looked like. So a lot of times there's a temptation to say, well, I need a demo unit. And in this case, we haven't seen that it's actually necessary. If you really want one, we'll make arrangements for that, but you may not. If you're used to having the demo equipment and you really want it, we'll help you out there. But don't think that you have to have that, because we haven't had to have it. Sponsor seminars. Okay, so if you're selling into dentistry, you know about this. I'd say most of what is sold in dentistry is done at a seminar. And so if you have leads into, or a path into a seminar, and we find that if you know the person talking and they give, we'll give them 3 or 4 slides on the GEMPro, and they bring up the benefits, maybe the clinical and a little bit of the product in their presentation. And if you have a table in the back, and that's an influential speaker, you'll get some business out of it. So that that's another. And number 6, that's kind of the same as number 5, but key opinion leaders require a little more effort to get buy-in from them, because their reputation's at stake. It's not just a topic, but they're going to talk about the problems that I talked about at first, probably in greater detail, and then talk about the solution, which includes the GEMPro. If you're successful getting that key opinion leader, or you have one and you want help bringing them into our tent, so to speak, we'll set up a webinar, and I'll depending on the type of speaker they are, we'll take as deep a dive as we need to take to get that person's buy-in, get them comfortable talking about the topic. And then again, when that person talks and you're in the back of the room with the table and you have a dozen GEMPros on the table, I expect you'll be able to sell them. Okay, so that's some of the suggestions that we have. ROI. I'm going to talk about the ROI. The opportunity for the actual test part is there's 2 codes. One of them is a medical code that's used in dentistry commonly. That code is 94762-26. That's oximetry with a report. That's what the 26 is. Again, that's a medical code, but because dentists are involved in sedation dentistry, it's used very commonly in dentistry. So it's not like the dental biller has to learn how to medical bill. It's not that scenario at all. And then the second code, S3900, that is a dental code for surface EMG. And again, that does require a report. and we have well, when I say report, it requires two elements to the report. Some type of numerical assessment with a narrative. I suspected this patient has bruxism because the evidence of damaged teeth. I did a surface EMG and learned that the patient is clenching and grinding 4.5 times per hour. As a result, I'm going to initiate and then whatever the therapy is. And those two reports will yield anywhere from $65 to $95 depending on the reimbursement based on the region and payer. Okay, so the cost of the test again is about 50 cents once you acquire the device, and the reimbursement on a conservative is $65. Okay. Here is, so that's the dentist ROI. I'm going to go back to that for a second because there's another big part of this. So that's the direct financial upside. The indirect financial upside is the dentist is going to triage the patients they can help and offload the ones they can't or aren't willing to. Now, if you think about that, if you think about a patient fussing, or I'm sorry, if you think about a dentist fussing with a patient because he thinks they just have bruxism, and in reality they have moderate sleep apnea, for example, that dentist is going to spend hours and hours and hours of frustrating time that's futile because they don't know that patient actually is an apneic, not really a bruxer in the sense that they see bruxism. We will prevent that from happening. Okay, so that's a tremendous upside. We triage, okay, these patients you can help, these you can't. We develop a strategy for those that they can't, whether it's sending them to a sleep lab or another dentist that does treat sleep apnea with appliances. And that's an upside for a dentist. Another way to think about this is as a dentist is treating a patient at any point in time and they want to address the cause, and they're going to say start an implant work, and that implant work is required because the patient clenches and grinds. Doesn't it make sense to address the cause before you spend $5,000, $15,000, $30,000 on a big implant job? Because think about it, if the problem still exists and you're putting in implants, do you think the implants are going to do anything about the airway issue? Probably not. So then you do this implant, you do all the carpentry that's involved with doing implants, and the patient still is suffering from sleep apnea and you don't know it. Okay, think about that benefit. Okay, that we're going to be able to prevent that outcome. Okay, so that's another part of the indirect benefit of doing this simple testing. Okay. All right, so that's ROI. Marketing pieces. We have a 2-page brochure that we've developed that we believe you can do a demo from in about 2 minutes. Page 1 talks about what at the top half of page 1 talks about what the product does. The bottom half says, why would you use this product? We're triaging, number 1, reasons to test your patients. Number 1, triage airway clenching versus true bruxism. Every dentist is going to know what you mean by that. Okay? Are you dealing with bruxism or are you dealing with an apnea? Okay? If you know the answer to that question, there's all the benefits that I just talked about are brought to bear. All right? Number 2, ensure the right guard does not ensure the guard that you're going to select doesn't compromise the airway. Okay? Is it worth 50 cents to be able to know which guard your patient actually needs? Simple question. It's almost silly. It sounds silly, but that's what we're offering. I mean, that's a benefit. This is one of the reasons why we think this is going to be a tremendously successful product. Number 3, detect, then protect. Okay? So detect what the problem is, why they're doing it, and then protect before the damage occurs. Okay? So if we think about how dentists identify historically bruxism, they look into the mouth and they look at damaged teeth. Okay? So the analogy I used to use is that would be like a cardiologist treating patients that have only had a heart attack. Okay? I mean, that's kind of a clumsy comparison, but you get the point. What if we could prevent the damage from occurring, and we can because we can detect bruxism very early in its disease state, and if it's airway related, we know there's a path to eliminating that problem. All right, so we can prevent bruxism. So now bruxism falls into the preventative dentistry category. Okay, is it worth 50 cents to have preventative bruxism dentistry? Simple question. Number 4, titrate diagnosed patients diagnosed with sleep apnea. So right now, for the case where a dentist has made a sleep apnea appliance, for those that are willing to do that, once they fit the appliance, when it's been delivered from the dental lab, there's a process where they kind of start in a neutral position with the appliance in the mandible, and then over time they protrude the mandible till the patient is breathing better. Well, how do they know the patient's breathing better? Ask them. You know, you can ask a patient how they sleep. They'll say, yeah, I sleep great. But really, do you know how they're doing? Are they doing better? You know, certainly they can say, yeah, I feel more rested. I'm feeling better. My bed partner says I don't snore. And that's very valid. But when we're talking about a medical condition, we need a little more, to be honest. And so why not use the GEMPro? And when you've protruded the mandible a little bit, maybe a couple millimeters or something, send them home with the GEMPro. See how they're doing. You know, if they're ODI, that number I talked about earlier with the oxygen desaturations, if they were having 20 desaturations an hour before you started with the appliance and now they're at 8, the patient's comfortable they're wearing it every night, go another millimeter. Get them down as low as you can without causing any side effects. You know, and you'll know when you're there. You know, again, we record the snoring and oxygen desats and bruxism, so you'll have all that data. Alternatively, you either need to send the patient home with a full home sleep monitor, or you will, and by the way, we'll do on our second webinar, we'll talk about our full home sleep monitor, or they have to send them back to a sleep lab for another study. You know, and that's no good. So what we're going to do is recommend that the GEMPro be used to titrate. And then finally, number 5, what we're getting at there is we believe that the GEMPro should be used on every new patient. There's no reason not to do it. And there's so much dental data there that's valuable. Why not do it? Okay. Oh, thank you for coming. You're a new patient. We're going to get some x-rays, do a cleaning, and I'm going to send you home with this device and bring it back. Because the test is so inexpensive, you may not even need to charge for it, or you can charge $50 or whatever you want to charge for it. But you know, the upside is you'll get this very valuable data. Okay. The backside of the GEMPro brochure talks about the product, the codes that can be used, and the reports that it generates. And so between the front page and the second page, we believe that's enough that a dentist will say the price, the introductory price for the GEMPro is $1,600. So for that price, we believe that this brochure will get you to a transaction on a visit. You know, that's been our experience. I'm just finishing up my webinar, so yeah, hold on. I'm just recording it. There's nobody on.
Okay, I'm going to bring some stuff in.
Okay. Okay, so that's the brochure. We do have a threefold. So for those of you that have dentists that you're currently working with and you want to send out a mailer, the purpose of the threefold is to enable you to print up your labels, send the mailer out, and then follow up with a phone call and get them, you know, it's just a literature piece designed to garner interest and generate a lead. As I mentioned earlier, Shannon Ross, who's the operations manager, sent out about 100 emails, and we sold 4 devices from those 100 emails. And the idea of sharing this with you is not necessarily that you'll take exactly this email because this was targeted to a specific group, but maybe you have a group. And we'll, whatever specifics that are related to that group, we'll develop the content of an email for you to send out, and then you generate your leads, and we'll teach you how to take an order and get your dentist signed up. So the idea here is two. One, the email worked. I mean, we've done email campaigns in the past, but never with that kind of response. So know that at the end of the day, when you are looking to perhaps send out an email, we'll help you generate the content for that. Okay. All right, let's talk about objection handling. We haven't had any. I'll be honest. We've sold about 10 units now. 5 of them to a person, and then the other 5 were to dentists, various dentists. And we haven't had objections. Now, the dentists that we've sold to were pretty knowledgeable in this area, and they recognized the value, and it was a very, very easy sale for us. However, as we go from people that are kind of in the know to the general dentist, there may be some pushback, and we've made an attempt to anticipate what pushback you might receive, and I wanted to spend just a few minutes on just more communicating with you that we've given this some thought and what we anticipate might be some pushback, okay? So here's 5 topics here. One is I don't treat sleep apnea. Well, you can say, well, that's the whole point of the GEMPro, is how do you know that sleep apnea is present? If you learn that it is, then you know to send that patient to the appropriate referral for treatment. If you don't know, you don't know. Okay, so that's probably when they say I don't treat sleep apnea, you should probably get happy, because that's probably the best thing that they could say to you. Number 2, I already do a good job with my bruxing patients. Well, all dentists know that they do. They do a good job of protecting the enamel. Okay, so just say that as in a gentle way as possible. Say, Dana, I've known you for years. I know you have a lot of integrity, and you only want the best for your patients. However, there's this new technology that will allow you to not only protect the enamel, but it'll help you with those patients that might need a little bit more intervention than what you're willing to do. Okay, so I never would infer that you're not doing a great job with your bruxing patient. Okay. Number 3, what happens if my patient has severe sleep apnea? Again, they're kind of referred back to what I was talking about with number 1. So there are some patients that there's no appliance that's appropriate for them. Their airway is in such a condition that they need to get to a sleep lab. Number 3 is also good news. How do you know your patient has severe sleep apnea? Okay, and how does that benefit you when you know that they have severe sleep apnea, and you've identified it and you've gotten them to a sleep lab to get treated? Okay, now let's talk about that for a second. 1, you as a dentist have intervened much earlier on a life-threatening disease, sleep apnea, than they might have, received from their from their physician. Okay, so that's number 1. Number 2, when the sooner you intervene on any type of chronic condition, in this case sleep apnea, the easier it is to manage and the better the outcome is, the clinical outcome. So as a dentist, when you think about number 3, that's only upside for everybody, including the patient, including yourself. Okay, so that's when you get that one, that's also good news. Number 4, I already use an oximeter. Say, oh, that's great. This does have oximetry, but it has body position, clenching and grinding, bruxism, and audio for snoring. So does your oximeter have those parameters? If not, then I would say it might be worth giving this a serious consideration, because when you take into account the additional clinical data that we deliver, it's certainly, I think you would agree, much more than just simple oximetry. And number 5, there is no reimbursement, and that's not necessarily true. You can, we talked about that in a few slides earlier, and they may even opt not to get reimbursement. But when you review the other benefits and you couple that with the reimbursement, I think number 5 can easily be argued away. Okay, so that's objection handling. These slides are kind of going into a little bit about what I've talked about, and when you receive the presentation after listening to this broadcast, if you want to review the specifics of objection handling, that's what that is. The quote, I'm going to send the quote to Barry, and then Barry's going to distribute the quote to you guys. I just wanted to review, wanted you to get an idea of what the quoting is going to go like. There's going to be an Excel document, and based on the preferences that you have with your patient or with your dentist, that will dictate what this how this form is filled out. We do have options. So there's the device. I haven't talked about it much, but just know that if a dentist says, Jesus is good, just too bad you don't have oximetry, you can say, yeah, you don't necessarily need to buy the amp. We can get you started with the tablet and the oximeter if that's really what you want. And we do have a price point for that, and it's listed here. We believe that the price point of $1,600 as the introductory price is such that it would be tough not to get somebody to the $1,600 product. We do offer insurance, and we do offer network support. So in our second webinar, this is part of where we're going to take a deeper dive. We're going to talk specifically about these components to the quoting, but know that they can opt in for network licensing, and we're going to talk about all the benefits to paying a very modest monthly fee, and there's a long list of benefits to be in our network. And then the insurance will be on the amp and the oximeter. If there's some type of failure, or they get damaged or what have you, the dentist will be covered if they purchase the insurance option. Okay. All right. So that's taking the order on the GEMPro. I'm going to spend the next just couple minutes talking about the BRX Pro. I mentioned it earlier in the context of therapy and how dentists can offer various therapies better when they know what's going on with the patient. So they can be much more precise on their treatment plan and recommendation when they know so much more about what's going on with the patient. And one of the best outcomes is that the patient has bruxism, and it's related to some type of airway issue, and we need some time to get the patient situated as to what's the best therapeutic option. So the BRX Pro is transitional. So it's designed to be made chair-side. It takes about less than 10 minutes. Well, I'll tell you, it takes the amount of time it takes whoever in the dental office makes impressions. It takes that same amount of time. So the BRX Pro is transitional, made chair-side. It's $90 to the dentist. It does establish whether the patient can tolerate sleep apnea appliance or not, and it doesn't work. So that's number 2. That's huge for when a dentist is about to ask for that large sleep apnea cost that we talked about earlier, the $3,000 on average. When the patient has a transitional unit and they feel better, they're sleeping better, we've gotten rid of their snoring, do you think that patient is more or less willing to pay $3,000 for long-term therapy? Okay, it's a rhetorical question, obviously, but it's one of the great benefits of the BRX Pro. The number 3, the principals at DDME have been involved in various areas of medical diagnostics, including treating patients with sleep apnea. And one of the big problems with compliance is there's a gap between the diagnosis and the therapy. And all dentists know that if you diagnose or you say, yeah, you do have a problem, come back in a month and we'll spend $2,000 to fix it. Well, a month later, you're not going to get that patient back. They've had a change of heart. However, if you've identified the issue and you say, here, let's get you into a BRX Pro, try this for a week, let's see how you do, they're engaged in the process without interruption, and we eliminate the risk of gaps in therapy. Okay? So how the BRX Pro works is there's two versions. There's a transitional version and then there's a long-term acrylic version. We're focusing right now on the transitional version, and it's essentially two partial trays, an upper and a lower, with an interior adjustable hinge that has 4 positions. And there's a couple of strategies here. One is the partial tray allows the molars to kind of be free floating. We know that when the molars come into contact with just about anything, there's a trigeminal nerve, if you're curious, and when that nerve detects enamel to enamel or enamel to acrylic for that matter, it innervates, and that's where a lot of the strength from the masseter comes in, is when that trigeminal nerve innervates. If we prevent that by having the back teeth free floating, then the strength of an event that might occur is dramatically reduced. So that's strategy number 1. Strategy number 2 is we talked about triggers. If we in airway triggers, that at the end of the whatever respiratory event we might have, there's a clench. If we eliminate that trigger, does the clench occur? Okay, so that's why the anterior hinge has 4 positions. We're going to keep the mandible in a known healthy position, so when they go to sleep, it doesn't go back into the airway, and then all these triggering events occur. We've had a number of people like the transitional version so much that they refuse to get into a sleep appliance and want just another BRX Pro. That's not how it's intended to be used. So we have an acrylic version, and it's made like any other lab appliance. You send an impression into the lab, and they'll make an acrylic version, send it back to the dentist, and then the dentist will fit them. Okay, so that's the BRX Pro acrylic. We've done some research. We're very much what's the term we use in dentistry? It's fact-based, and we did a very thorough investigation, and we saw that on that first chart we saw improvements in both the measures of the airway, which we call AHI, apnea-hypopnea index. That's the term that we use in sleep apnea world to describe the functioning of the airway. And then same thing, we do ODI, but we do measure directly ODI with the GEMPro. And we saw dramatic improvements in both those measures. So what's good about that? If an apnea or a hypopnea is triggering a clench, and that apnea-hypopnea doesn't occur, does the clench occur? That's why we care about that. We also measure, I talked about that calibration that we went through. The total energy output by the masseter is dramatically reduced. That's the lower chart there. Okay. And as we measured the total energy, not just from clenching and grinding, but the total energy throughout the night, and we use the baseline as 100%. So when they just sleep without anything, that's their baseline. The inappropriate arch actually causes the energy to go up. Okay, and when I say inappropriate, it might be an appliance that's protecting the teeth but causing other problems. Okay, so then the total energy expenditure by the masseter went up, and you can see on the BRX Pro, the third point in our chart there, we saw a 3/4 reduction in the energy output. And when you're dealing with bruxism, that's great. So that's what I wanted to talk about with you guys today. Again, we're going to schedule a second webinar that's going to be a little bit more detailed in our presentation with regards to the clinical story. We're going to talk a little bit more about the technical aspects of the product, and we're going to spend the biggest part of our time with selling strategies and how to take an order. Okay? If you have any questions, by all means, call myself or Barry, and we'll get back to you with your question and answer to your question. Okay? Thanks for attending, and we'll talk soon. Thanks. Bye.